Sergeant Major William Thompson adjusted his uniform one last time before entering the departure lounge at Heathrow Airport. The Victoria Cross medal on his chest caught the morning light, a reminder of the day he saved 12 soldiers in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Today should have been different. Today he was flying home from a special ceremony at Buckingham Palace where King Charles had personally thanked him for his continued service to the crown. The 45-year-old veteran had spent the last 2 days in London attending royal engagements. His wife Sarah and teenage daughter Emma were waiting for him back in Edinburgh, probably preparing his favorite Sunday roast. William smiled, thinking about Emma's excitement when he told her about meeting the king. She had always been proud of her father's military service, even during the difficult years when nightmares from combat kept him awake. At the check-in counter, William presented his first-class ticket. The royal household had arranged everything, ensuring he traveled in comfort after his service to the nation. The young airline employee, barely out of training, scanned the ticket with routine efficiency. Her name tag read Jessica, and she seemed distracted by something on her computer screen. "I'm sorry, sir," Jessica said without looking up. "There's been an overbooking situation in first class. We'll need to move you to economy." William blinked, certain he had misheard. "Excuse me?" This ticket was arranged by Buckingham Palace for official royal business. Jessica finally looked at him, her eyes briefly registering the medals on his uniform before returning to her screen. "I understand your concern, but we have several VIP passengers today. A business executive and his family need those seats more urgently. You'll be compensated with airline miles." The words hung in the air like a slap. William had faced enemy fire, led men through impossible situations, and earned the highest military honor his country could bestow. Yet here he stood being told that his sacrifice meant less than someone's business deal. "Miss, I think there's been a mistake," William said calmly, though his jaw tightened. "This is a confirmed first-class reservation made by the royal household." Jessica's supervisor, a middle-aged man named David, approached after overhearing the conversation. He glanced at William's uniform and medals with mild interest before shrugging. "Look, we have our procedures. These things happen. Economy isn't that bad, and you'll get there just the same." William felt heat rising in his chest, not from anger but from disbelief. In the military, respect and honor meant everything. Chain of command existed for good reasons. Here in civilian life, it seemed those values meant nothing when profit was involved. "Do you know what this medal represents?" William asked quietly, touching the Victoria Cross. David barely glanced at it. "I'm sure it's very nice, but we have a business to run. The executive and his family are platinum members with our airline. They fly with us every month. You're flying once." Other passengers in line began to notice the commotion. Some pulled out phones, recognizing the significance of William's medals. A few whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. An elderly woman behind William shook her head in disgust. William realized this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about what his country valued, what his service meant, and how veterans were treated when the cameras weren't rolling. The young soldiers under his command looked up to him. What would they think if they saw this? "I'll take the economy seat," William said finally, his voice steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "But I want this documented. What's happening here isn't right." Jessica printed his new boarding pass with practiced indifference. "Economy section, row 34, middle seat. Boarding starts in 30 minutes. As William walked away from the counter, his phone buzzed with messages from Sarah asking about his flight. How could he explain this to his daughter, who believed her father was a hero? How could he explain that in the real world money talked louder than medals? He found a quiet corner of the departure lounge and sat down heavily. Around him, business travelers tapped on laptops and spoke into phones about deals and profits. None of them seemed to notice the man with the Victoria Cross sitting alone, stripped of the dignity he had earned through blood and sacrifice. William closed his eyes and thought about the moment he earned his medal. Taliban fighters had pinned down his unit in a valley outside Kandahar. Without thinking of his own safety, he had charged their position alone, drawing fire away from his men. He had carried wounded soldiers to safety under heavy gunfire, making 3 trips while bullets whistled past his head. The Queen herself had placed the medal around his neck, telling him that his country would never forget his sacrifice. Today, it seemed they already had. A young soldier in dress uniform approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Sergeant Major Thompson?" I saw your picture in the military magazine. I just want to say thank you for your service. William looked up at the fresh-faced private, probably not much older than his daughter. Thank you, son. What's your name? Private Collins, sir. I'm heading to my first deployment next week. Reading about what you did, it gives us hope that we can be brave when it matters. William shook the young man's hand, feeling the weight of responsibility. Remember, son, real courage isn't about the medals or recognition. It's about doing what's right when no one's watching. Private Collins nodded seriously and walked away, leaving William alone with his thoughts. As boarding began, he watched the first-class passengers enter the plane ahead of him. Among them was the business executive who had taken his seat, a man in an expensive suit talking loudly on his phone about quarterly profits. William gathered his small carry-on bag and joined the long line for economy boarding. Tomorrow this would just be a bad memory, but the principle of it, the message it sent about how society valued military service, would stay with him much longer. He had no idea that this moment of quiet dignity in the face of disrespect was about to change everything, not just for him, but for everyone who witnessed what happened next. The economy section of the aircraft was cramped and noisy. William squeezed into his middle seat between a businessman who immediately claimed both armrests and a college student wearing headphones that leaked music. His knees pressed against the seat in front of him, a stark contrast to the spacious first-class cabin he should have occupied. As the plane taxied for takeoff, William tried to focus on the positive aspects of his London trip. King Charles had been genuinely warm during their meeting, asking detailed questions about veteran support programs and promising continued royal attention to military welfare. The king had even mentioned William by name in his speech, calling him a shining example of British courage and dedication. But now, crammed into economy while someone else enjoyed the comfort meant for him, those royal words felt hollow. The businessman beside him was already complaining loudly to a flight attendant about the meal options, his voice carrying across several rows. William wondered if this was the same VIP who had taken his seat. Halfway through the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties with our navigation system. We'll need to make an emergency landing at Manchester Airport. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions. The plane began descending rapidly. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling as passengers around William started to panic. Children cried while their parents struggled to appear calm. The businessman who had been so demanding earlier was now gripping his armrest, his face pale with fear. William's military training kicked in immediately. While others panicked, he remained perfectly calm. He helped the elderly woman across the aisle secure her oxygen mask, then assisted a mother with young twins who was traveling alone. His steady presence and quiet confidence began to calm those around him. Everyone stay seated and breathe normally, William said in his commanding voice, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. The crew knows what they're doing. We're going to be fine. The college student next to him pulled off his headphones, wide-eyed with terror. Are we going to crash? No, son, William replied firmly. This is just a precaution. I've been in much more dangerous situations than this, and we always made it through. As the plane shook during its rapid descent, William noticed a flight attendant struggling to maintain order in the front of the economy section. Passengers were standing up despite instructions to remain seated, blocking the aisles and creating potential danger. Without thinking, William unbuckled his seatbelt and moved forward. Ladies and gentlemen, he called out in his sergeant major voice, I need everyone to return to your seats immediately. You're putting yourselves and others at risk. Something in his tone, his bearing, and the authority that came from years of leading soldiers under pressure made people listen. They quickly sat down and the flight attendant gave him a grateful nod. Thank you, she whispered. I'm Sarah, the lead attendant. Are you military? Sergeant Major William Thompson, retired. He replied quietly. How can I help? Sarah looked relieved to have someone competent to work with. We have a passenger in first class having a panic attack. The doctor we called for isn't responding. Could you? William didn't hesitate. He followed Sarah to the first-class cabin, where he found chaos. The business executive who had taken his seat was hyperventilating badly, surrounded by his frightened family. His expensive suit was soaked with sweat and he was gasping for air. Sir, I need you to focus on my voice, William said, kneeling beside the man's seat. "You're having a panic attack, but you're safe. The pilots have everything under control." The executive looked at William with terror-filled eyes. "We're going to die." "I can't breathe." William recognized the symptoms from soldiers he had treated for combat stress. "What's your name?" "Marcus." "Marcus Davidson," the man gasped. "Marcus, I'm William. I want you to breathe with me. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4.
"Can you do that?"
For the next several minutes, William worked with Marcus using techniques he had learned for helping soldiers cope with trauma and panic. Gradually, Marcus's breathing returned to normal. His wife, who had been crying quietly, squeezed William's hand in gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do." William stayed with the family until the plane landed safely at Manchester Airport. Emergency vehicles were waiting, but the technical problem turned out to be minor, a false alarm that caused more fear than actual danger. As passengers disembarked, Marcus approached William hesitantly. He looked embarrassed and ashamed, as if remembering something important. "You're the soldier from the check-in counter," Marcus said quietly. I took your seat." William nodded but didn't speak. He could see the realization dawning on Marcus's face. The man who had helped him through his worst moment was the same person he had displaced without a second thought. "I had no idea who you were," Marcus continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I just saw another passenger and figured, God, what kind of person does that make me?" "It makes you human," William replied simply. "We all make mistakes when we forget to see each other as people." Marcus looked at the medals on William's uniform, really seeing them for the first time. Is that the Victoria Cross?" "Yes," Marcus closed his eyes as if in pain. "You saved my life today, and I didn't even have the decency to treat you with basic respect this morning. I don't know how to apologize for that." "You don't need to apologize to me," William said, "but maybe think about it the next time you're in a position to make someone else's day a little better or worse." As they waited for their connecting flight to Edinburgh, word began to spread among the passengers about what had happened. The story was remarkable enough. A decorated war hero helping the same man who had taken his first-class seat, responding to his crisis with nothing but kindness and professionalism. Several passengers had recorded parts of the incident on their phones. By the time they boarded their connecting flight, videos of William helping during the emergency were already being shared on social media. The contrast between his treatment at check-in and his behavior during the crisis was striking. But William remained unaware of the growing attention. He was simply focused on getting home to Sarah and Emma, hoping to put this strange day behind him. He had no idea that his quiet dignity and selfless actions were about to reach the very highest levels of British society, or that King Charles himself would soon learn exactly how one of his honored guests had been treated by the airline. The stage was set for something unprecedented, though William Thompson, Victoria Cross recipient and guardian of British values, remained focused only on the simple pleasure of returning home to his family. By the time William's connecting flight landed in Edinburgh, the videos from the emergency landing had gone viral. Passengers had shared footage of him calming panicked travelers, helping the flight crew, and most remarkably, assisting the same businessman who had taken his first-class seat just hours earlier. Emma Thompson was waiting at the arrivals gate, bouncing on her toes with excitement. At 17, she was her father's biggest supporter, often defending his military service to classmates who didn't understand why he sometimes seemed distant or troubled by memories. "Dad," she called out, rushing to hug him. "How was meeting the king? Did you tell him about my university applications?" William wrapped his daughter in a tight embrace, feeling the stress of the day melt away. "He asked about my family, actually. I told him I had the smartest daughter in Scotland." Sarah Thompson approached more slowly, her nurse's trained eye immediately noticing the tension in her husband's shoulders. After 20 years of marriage, she could read his moods better than anyone. Something had happened beyond the usual pomp of royal ceremonies. "Rough flight?" she asked, linking her arm through his as they walked toward the car park. "You could say that," William replied, not wanting to burden his family with the details. "Just some turbulence." But as they drove home through Edinburgh's ancient streets, Sarah's phone began buzzing with notifications. Friends from the hospital where she worked were sending her links to social media posts. A video tagged "Hero on Flight 247" was spreading rapidly across platforms. "William," Sarah said slowly, staring at her phone screen. You need to see this. The video showed William in his dress uniform, calmly helping passengers during the emergency landing. The caption read, "This decorated soldier was downgraded from first class this morning, then spent the flight helping everyone around him, including the businessman who took his seat." This is what real class looks like. Emma grabbed the phone, her eyes widening as she watched her father on the small screen. "Dad, you're famous. Look at all these comments." Thousands of people had shared the video, expressing outrage at how William had been treated and admiration for his response. Military veterans were particularly vocal, sharing their own stories of poor treatment by airlines and corporations who claimed to support troops, but failed to back up their words with actions. "I don't understand," Emma said, looking between her parents. "What happened with your seat?" William sighed, realizing he couldn't keep the story from his family. As they sat in their modest living room, he explained the morning's events, the casual dismissal at check-in, the assumption that his military service didn't matter as much as frequent flyer status, and the humiliation of being treated as a second-class citizen. Sarah's face flushed with anger. "They did what? After you'd just come from Buckingham Palace?" "It's fine, love," William said quietly. "It's over now." "No, it's not fine," Emma declared with teenage righteousness. "You earned that medal saving people's lives. How dare they treat you like that?" But William's ordeal was far from over. By Monday morning, the story had been picked up by major news outlets. The BBC ran a segment titled "From Palace to Economy: How Britain Treats Its Heroes." The contrast between the royal treatment William had received and the airline's dismissive attitude struck a nerve with the public. The COE, Airline's customer service department, was overwhelmed with complaints. Their social media accounts were flooded with angry comments from people demanding better treatment for military personnel. Veterans organizations began calling for boycotts, and several members of parliament raised questions about corporate responsibility toward service members. William returned to his job at the Veteran Support Center, where he counseled former soldiers struggling with civilian life. His colleagues had seen the news, but they knew him well enough to treat the situation with the understated humor, typical of military culture. "So, you're famous now," said James Morrison, a former Royal Marine who had lost his leg in Iraq. "Does this mean you'll be too good to work with us regular folk?" William laughed, grateful for the normalcy. "I think my 15 minutes are about over. People will find something else to be angry about soon enough." But he was wrong. The story had reached levels of society that rarely paid attention to individual incidents of poor customer service. The royal household had been quietly monitoring the situation, particularly after several members of parliament brought it to their attention during regular briefings. Private Secretary to the King, Sir Edmund Hartwell, had served in the military himself before joining the royal household. He understood both the significance of William's medal and the broader implications of how the nation treated its veterans. When he briefed King Charles on the situation during their Tuesday morning meeting, the King's reaction was immediate and decisive. "This is exactly the kind of thing we discussed during our conversation," King Charles said, referring to his meeting with William just days earlier. "Here's a man who exemplifies the values we claim to cherish, and he's treated with casual disrespect by people who profit from our society's freedoms." Sir Edmund nodded. "The public response has been quite strong, Your Majesty. It seems to have touched on deeper concerns about how we value service and sacrifice." King Charles stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. He had spent his entire life in service to the nation, understanding the weight of duty and the cost of putting country before self. The idea that someone like William Thompson, who had literally earned the highest honor for courage, could be dismissed so carelessly troubled him deeply. "What's the airline's response been?" the king asked. "Typical corporate speak," Sir Edmund replied. "They've issued a statement about reviewing their policies and apologizing for any inconvenience. Rather tone-deaf considering the circumstances." The king turned back to his secretary, with a look that Sir Edmund had seen before, the expression of a monarch who had decided to use the full weight of his position to make a point about values and priorities. "I think it's time we reminded people what these medals actually mean," King Charles said quietly, "and perhaps demonstrated how a grateful nation should treat those who've earned them." Sir Edmund smiled slightly. In his years of service to the crown, He had learned to recognize when the king was about to do something that would surprise everyone, including his own staff. "What did you have in mind, Your Majesty?" "Cancel my engagements for Thursday afternoon," the king said. "I believe it's time for an unscheduled royal visit to Edinburgh." "And Sir Edmund? Make sure the press knows I'm coming, but don't tell them why. Let them figure it out when I arrive at the Thompson family's front door." As Sir Edmund left to make arrangements, King Charles remained at the window thinking about duty, honor, and the quiet dignity of men like William Thompson. The airline had made a simple business decision based on profit margins and customer loyalty programs. They were about to learn that some things, like the respect owed to those who serve their country, were far more valuable than their spreadsheets could calculate. The stage was set for a royal intervention that would transform a simple case of poor customer service into a defining moment about British values and the true meaning of honor. Thursday morning brought an unusual flurry of activity to the quiet Edinburgh neighborhood where the Thompson family lived. Sarah noticed police officers positioning themselves discreetly around the street corners, and several black vehicles with tinted windows had appeared near the local shops. "Something's happening," she told William as they had breakfast. "There are security people everywhere." William glanced out the window, his military training automatically assessing the positioning of personnel. "Looks like a protection detail. Someone important must be visiting the area." Emma, checking social media over her cereal, suddenly gasped. "Mom, Dad, look at this." The royal Twitter account posted that King Charles is making an unscheduled visit to recognize outstanding service to the nation in Edinburgh today. "People are going crazy trying to figure out where he's going." The family exchanged glances, but none of them imagined they could be connected to such an event. William had met the king just a week ago at the palace. Surely that was the extent of his royal encounters. At the Veteran Support Center, William's morning was interrupted by his supervisor, Colonel Patricia Hughes, who seemed unusually flustered. "William, I've just had the strangest call from someone claiming to be from the royal household. They wanted to confirm your home address and ensure you'd be there this afternoon." William frowned. "That doesn't make sense. Why would they need my address?" "I have no idea. But the caller knew details about your service record that aren't public knowledge. They also mentioned your recent flight experience." Colonel Hughes paused, studying his face. "William, is there something you haven't told us about what happened at the palace?" Before William could respond, his phone rang. The caller identified herself as Private Secretary Lady Caroline Windsor, speaking from Buckingham Palace. "Sergeant Major Thompson, His Majesty would like to visit your home this afternoon at 2 o'clock if that's convenient for you and your family." William nearly dropped his phone. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" "His Majesty King Charles will be calling on you personally this afternoon. We understand this is short notice, but the king was quite insistent about the timing. He specifically requested this be a private visit to your home." After confirming the details and hanging up, William sat in stunned silence. Colonel Hughes watched him with growing curiosity. "Well, what was that about?" "The king is coming to my house," William said slowly, as if saying the words might make them less incredible. "Today, in 4 hours." Word spread quickly through the Veteran Center. By noon, speculation was running wild among his colleagues. Some thought he was being honored with an additional award. Others wondered if the king had heard about the airline incident and wanted to make a statement. William drove home in a daze, calling Sarah from the car. "You need to sit down before I tell you this," he began. "William Thompson, what have you done now?" Sarah asked, though her voice carried more amusement than concern. "The king is coming to our house today, in 2 hours." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that William thought the call had dropped. Finally, Sarah spoke. "The king? Our king coming to our house?" "That's what they said." "Oh my God, William. The house is a mess. Emma left her university papers all over the dining room table, and I haven't cleaned the bathroom since. Oh my God." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah rushed home from the hospital to clean frantically, while Emma borrowed a dress from her best friend. William, unsure of protocol for receiving royalty at home, decided to wear his dress uniform with all his medals. Meanwhile, across Edinburgh, news crews were positioning themselves strategically around the city, trying to guess the king's destination. The Royal Protection Team had been efficient in keeping the location secret, but journalists were interviewing local officials and monitoring police radio frequencies. At exactly 2 o'clock, the distinctive royal motorcade turned onto the Thompson Street. Neighbors emerged from their houses to stare in amazement as the convoy stopped in front of the modest Victorian terrace house where William and his family lived. King Charles emerged from his vehicle, wearing a navy suit and a warm smile. He carried himself with the easy confidence that came from decades of public service, but his expression showed genuine pleasure rather than the formal politeness of official duties. The royal protection officers established a discreet perimeter, while the king walked up the short garden path to the Thompsons' front door. William, Sarah, and Emma waited nervously in their small entryway, hearts pounding with anticipation. The king's knock was gentle and unhurried. William opened the door and immediately bowed, followed by Sarah and Emma, who curtsied as they'd hastily practiced after watching YouTube tutorials. "Sergeant Major Thompson," King Charles said warmly, extending his hand. "Thank you for receiving me in your home. I hope you don't mind the intrusion." "Your Majesty, we're honored," William replied, still somewhat stunned by the surreal nature of the situation. "And you must be Sarah," the king continued, turning to William's wife. "I understand you're a nurse. Essential work, particularly after what we've all been through these past few years." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Sarah managed, her nursing training helping her remain composed despite her racing heart. "And Emma," the king said, addressing their daughter with the same warm attention. "Your father tells me you're applying to university. What are you planning to study?" "Medicine, Your Majesty," Emma replied, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I want to be a surgeon." "Excellent choice. The country needs more dedicated medical professionals." The king paused, his expression becoming more serious. "Now I wonder if we might have a private conversation. I have something rather important to discuss with your family." As they moved into the living room, neighbors and passing pedestrians gathered on the street outside, phones in hand capturing this extraordinary scene. News crews, finally locating the royal visit, began arriving and setting up their equipment behind the police barriers. Inside the modest living room, King Charles declined offers of tea and settled into William's favorite armchair, with the ease of someone comfortable in any setting. "I suspect you're wondering why I'm here," he began. The thought had crossed our minds. "Your Majesty," William replied with a slight smile. "I've become aware of your recent travel experience," the king said, his tone becoming more formal. "The way you were treated by that airline is absolutely unacceptable, particularly given your service to the crown and our nation." Sarah and Emma exchanged glances, beginning to understand the magnitude of what was happening. This wasn't just a social call. The King of England had come personally to address the injustice their husband and father had suffered. "Your Majesty, I don't want to make a big deal of what happened," William began, but the king raised his hand gently. "Sergeant Major, with respect, it is a big deal. The Victoria Cross represents the highest ideals of our nation: courage, sacrifice, and putting others before oneself. When we allow holders of this honor to be treated with casual disrespect, we diminish not just the medal, but the values it represents." The king's words carried the weight of centuries of tradition and the moral authority of the crown. In that moment, sitting in their simple living room, the Thompson family realized they were witnessing something unprecedented: a monarch using his personal intervention to defend the principles that defined their nation. King Charles leaned forward in his chair, his expression both serious and compassionate. "William, I want you to understand something. When I placed that medal around your neck 3 years ago, I wasn't just recognizing your actions in Afghanistan. I was acknowledging your commitment to the values that define our nation: selflessness, duty, and courage under pressure." The room was completely silent except for the distant sound of gathering crowds outside. Sarah reached for William's hand, sensing the importance of this moment. "What happened on that airline," the king continued, "represents everything that's wrong with how we've allowed commercial interests to override basic human decency and respect for service. But what you did afterward, helping others during the emergency, showing kindness to the very man who had dismissed you, that represents everything that's right about our national character." Emma found her voice despite her nervousness. "Your Majesty, My father has always taught me that doing the right thing matters more than getting recognition for it." King Charles smiled at her. "Wise words from a wise father. But recognition serves an important purpose, Emma. It reminds society what we value and what behavior we want to encourage." He turned back to William. "Which brings me to why I'm here." The king reached into his jacket and withdrew a formal document bearing the royal seal. "Sergeant Major Thompson, by the power vested in me as your sovereign, I am hereby appointing you as a member of the Royal Victorian Order, in recognition of your exemplary service to the Crown and your embodiment of the highest British values." William's mouth fell open in shock. The Royal Victorian Order was a personal gift from the monarch, awarded at their sole discretion to recognize exceptional service. It was one of the most prestigious honors in the British system, and completely unexpected. "Your Majesty, I don't know what to say," William stammered. Furthermore, the king continued, clearly enjoying the family's amazement, "I am also announcing today the establishment of the Thompson Fellowship for Military Veterans, a program that will ensure no service member is ever again treated with the disrespect you experienced. Airlines, hotels, and other service providers who want to claim they support our troops will now have to prove it through their actions, not just their advertising." Sarah began to cry quietly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. Her husband, who still sometimes woke up from nightmares about Afghanistan, who quietly struggled with the transition to civilian life, was being honored by the king himself in their own living room. "There's one more thing," King Charles said, standing up. "I've spoken personally with the CEO of the airline involved. They've agreed to implement immediate changes to their policies regarding military personnel. They're also making a substantial donation to veterans charities, and yes, William, they've offered you and your family free first-class travel for life, though I suspect you might prefer to fly with their competitors in the future." William finally found his voice. "Your Majesty, this is far more than I ever expected or deserved." "On the contrary," the king replied firmly, "this is exactly what you deserve, and frankly, it's less than what our nation owes you. The real question is whether we've learned anything from this experience." Outside, the crowd had grown substantially. News of the king's location had spread on social media, and hundreds of people had gathered to witness this unprecedented royal visit. Many were veterans themselves, drawn by word that the king was personally supporting one of their own. King Charles walked to the window and looked out at the assembled crowd. "It seems we have an audience," he observed with amusement. "Would you mind if we stepped outside? I think the people gathered here deserve to understand what this visit represents." The family followed the king to their front door. As they appeared, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Veterans in the group stood at attention, saluting William and the king. The scene was electric with emotion and national pride. King Charles gestured for quiet and, in the tradition of royal addresses, spoke without amplification, his trained voice carrying clearly across the gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here today to honor Sergeant Major William Thompson, not just for his extraordinary courage in Afghanistan, but for his grace under pressure this past week. When faced with disrespect and dismissal, he responded with dignity and continued service to others. This is the character we should celebrate in our nation." The crowd cheered again and someone shouted, "Long live the king!" Others picked up the call until the entire street echoed with the traditional acclamation. "But I'm also here," the king continued, "to make a broader point about how we treat those who serve our country. The Victoria Cross isn't just a piece of metal. It represents a commitment to putting others before yourself, to defending our values even at personal cost. When we allow holders of this honor to be treated poorly, we diminish ourselves as a nation." Marcus Davidson, the businessman from the flight, had somehow learned of the king's visit and made his way to Edinburgh. He stood at the back of the crowd, tears streaming down his face as he listened to the king's words about the man who had helped him through his panic attack. "From today forward," the king announced, "we're establishing new standards for how our veterans are treated. The Thompson Fellowship will ensure that service members receive the respect they've earned, not just in our ceremonies and parades, but in their daily lives as citizens." The applause was thunderous. News cameras captured every word, broadcasting the scene live across the United Kingdom and around the world. Social media exploded with reactions from veterans, military families, and ordinary citizens who were moved by the king's personal intervention. After the public address, The king spent another hour inside with the Thompson family, talking about everything from Emma's university plans to Sarah's work in the NHS. The conversation was relaxed and genuine, with none of the formal distance typically associated with royal encounters. "Your Majesty," William said as the visit was drawing to a close, "I have to ask, how did you even hear about what happened on the flight?" King Charles smiled. "William, when someone wearing the Victoria Cross acts with the kind of dignity you showed, word reaches the palace very quickly. We have people who pay attention to these things, particularly when they involve the values we're supposed to represent as a nation." As the royal motorcade prepared to leave, King Charles shook hands with each family member again. "Remember," he told Emma, "your father is a hero not just because of what he did in Afghanistan, but because of who he is every day. That's the kind of person we need more of in this world." The king's departure left the family emotionally drained but profoundly moved. Outside, the crowd slowly dispersed, but many veterans lingered, wanting to shake William's hand and share their own stories of poor treatment and the difference this royal intervention might make. As evening fell on their quiet Edinburgh street, the Thompson family sat together in their living room, still trying to process what had happened. The formal documents announcing William's new honor lay on the coffee table, but it was the king's personal attention, his genuine concern for their family, that would stay with them forever. None of them realized that this was just the beginning of the changes that would ripple out from this extraordinary day. 3 months after the king's visit, the changes set in motion by that extraordinary afternoon had transformed far more than just airline policies. The Thompson Fellowship had become a model program studied by governments around the world, demonstrating how nations could honor their veterans through practical action rather than empty gestures. William found himself in the unexpected position of being a national advocate for veteran affairs. Speaking invitations poured in from organizations across the country, and while he accepted some, he remained committed to his work at the Veteran Support Center in Edinburgh. His colleagues joked that he was the only counselor whose office visits had to be scheduled around media interviews. "Never thought I'd see the day when our William would be famous," James Morrison commented as they reviewed case files for veterans struggling with housing issues. "Though I suppose if anyone deserves it, it's you." William looked up from the stack of applications on his desk. Each form represented a former service member facing challenges in civilian life: unemployment, housing problems, mental health struggles, or simple bureaucratic indifference. The king's intervention had brought attention to these issues, but the real work happened here, one veteran at a time. "The attention is useful if it helps people like these," William replied, tapping the files. "But I worry about what happens when the cameras move on to the next story." His concerns proved unnecessary. The Thompson Fellowship had created sustainable change by establishing clear standards and accountability measures. Airlines, hotels, and other service providers now faced regular audits of their treatment of military personnel. Companies that failed to meet the standards lost their government contracts and faced public scrutiny that damaged their reputation. The airline that had originally downgraded William had become an unexpected champion of the new system. Their CEO, Margaret Sterling, had taken the king's criticism personally and implemented the most comprehensive veteran support program in the industry. She often spoke publicly about how one moment of poor judgment by her staff had led to transformative changes across her company. "We learned that supporting our military can't just be a marketing slogan," she said during a conference on corporate social responsibility. "It has to be embedded in how we train our staff, design our policies, and measure our success." Emma Thompson was finishing her first year of medical school, where she had started a student organization focused on veteran healthcare issues. Her father's experience had opened her eyes to the challenges faced by former service members, particularly around mental health and the transition to civilian life. "Dad always taught me that actions matter more than words," she told a gathering of medical students. "Watching how he handled everything that happened, seeing the dignity he maintained even when he was being disrespected, that taught me more about character than any textbook ever could." Sarah Thompson had been promoted to head of nursing at her hospital, partly due to the leadership skills she demonstrated during the media attention following the king's visit. She had used her new position to establish support programs for healthcare workers who were also military spouses or veterans themselves. The most surprising development came from Marcus Davidson, the businessman who had originally taken William's first-class seat. The guilt and shame he felt after learning William's identity had motivated him to make substantial changes in his own life. He had sold his consulting firm and used the proceeds to establish a foundation supporting veteran employment programs. "I spent years thinking that business success justified everything," Marcus explained during a television interview about his foundation. "Meeting William Thompson, seeing how he treated me with kindness even after I had dismissed him, made me realize what real success looks like." Marcus had become one of William's closest supporters, and the two men had developed an unlikely friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to veteran welfare. Their story had become a powerful example of how understanding and forgiveness could bridge social divides. On the first anniversary of the king's visit, the Thompson family received an invitation to attend a special ceremony at Buckingham Palace. The Thompson Fellowship had helped over 10,000 veterans in its first year, and the king wanted to recognize the program's success publicly. This time, William's flight to London was very different. The airline provided first-class service without being asked, and the crew made a point of thanking him for his service. More importantly, William noticed that other military personnel on the flight were also being treated with genuine respect and appreciation. At the palace ceremony, King Charles presented awards to organizations and individuals who had contributed to the fellowship's success. When he reached William, the king paused and spoke personally rather than reading from prepared remarks. "Sergeant Major Thompson, 1 year ago you faced a choice. You could have responded to disrespect with anger, or to injustice with bitterness. Instead, you chose dignity and continued service to others. That choice created ripples that have touched thousands of lives and reminded our nation of its better angels." The king's words resonated beyond the palace walls. The ceremony was broadcast live, and viewers around the world saw not just the pomp of royal tradition, but a genuine expression of values that transcended national boundaries. Veterans organizations in other countries began adapting the Thompson Fellowship model to their own societies. Years later, historians would mark the king's visit to Edinburgh as a turning point in how Britain honored its military personnel. But for William Thompson, sitting in his living room that had once hosted a king, the real measure of success was simpler and more personal. On his desk at the Veterans Center sat hundreds of thank-you letters from former service members who had been helped by the fellowship program. Some had found employment, others had secured housing, and many had simply experienced the dignity of being treated with respect for their service. "You know what the best part is?" William told Sarah one evening as they walked through their neighborhood. "It's not the medal or the recognition. It's knowing that other veterans won't have to go through what I did. That their service will be honored not just with words but with actions." Sarah squeezed his arm, thinking about how much their lives had changed since that difficult day at the airport. "You always said that real honor comes from what you do when no one's watching. I think the whole country learned that lesson from you." As they walked home past the small plaque the city had installed marking the location of the king's historic visit, William reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a moment of disrespect and ended with lasting change. The Victoria Cross on his uniform remained the same piece of metal it had always been, but its meaning had been renewed and strengthened through the actions it had inspired. The story of Sergeant Major William Thompson and his encounter with both corporate indifference and royal intervention had become part of British national memory, a reminder that individual dignity and national values were inseparable, and that sometimes it takes a king to remind a kingdom of what it truly means to honor those who serve.